Ever wondered what it feels like to be treated like a criminal on your own land? That's almost exactly what happened to me. A cop nearly told me, "Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing on your own property," until I pulled out the deed. You see, a woman named Karen had been wreaking havoc across our lake community for months, calling the police on anyone who dared to exist without her approval. She threatened to sue me for $50,000, filed bogus police reports, and even tried bribing county officials to have me thrown off my land. Here's the twist. She didn't realize I was the actual owner of the $800,000 mansion she was renting. Imagine dawn breaking over Lake Serenity, the crisp scent of pine drifting through morning mist. Suddenly, blue lights flash across my grandfather's old cabin. Tires grind over gravel as two squad cars roll up. And there she stands, Brenda Carmichael, on the deck of her rented mansion, wrapped in a neon pink bathrobe, pointing at me like I'm some kind of mastermind criminal. Now, what would you do if the cops showed up while you were fishing on your own property? Drop your answer below. I'm sure half of you have your own HOA horror stories. My name's Marcus, and 3 years ago I thought I had found paradise. After 20 years in military logistics and a divorce that felt like being crushed by a tank driven by my ex-wife's lawyer, I inherited my grandfather's cabin on Lake Serenity, Minnesota. Population 3,200. Back then, the most dramatic event was Mrs. Henderson's cat swiping fish from her neighbor's docks. The cabin itself wasn't fancy, just a 1960s A-frame perched on 2 acres of pure heaven. Each morning, I'd wake to loons calling across glassy water, step onto dock boards polished smooth by 40 years of Minnesota weather, and breathe air so clean it erased decades of Army diesel fumes from my lungs. That place smelled like my childhood, aged cedar, fresh pine needles, and the cool metallic tang of lake water at dawn. For 2 perfect years, Lake Serenity truly lived up to its name. 47 properties dotted 8 miles of shoreline, home to a mix of hard-working, blue-collar families. Locals and summer folks all lived by one sacred code: wave when you pass, lend a hand when someone's in trouble, and mind your own business the rest of the time. Then along came Hurricane Brenda. She snapped up the lake's biggest eyesore, an $800,000 McMansion that looked like it had been airdropped from suburban Dallas straight into the Minnesota woods. Within a week of moving in, she'd paraded herself around half the lake by pontoon boat, dressed in blinding white capris and cardigans bright enough to flag down passing aircraft. Sweet as saccharin on the outside, but her eyes were colder than January ice. Then came the morning everything shifted. I was sitting on my dock, sipping coffee that tasted like liquid peace, when I heard the low growl of an overpowered pontoon tearing through the calm like a chainsaw through silk. "Yoo-hoo! Hello there, neighbor!" Brenda's voice carried over the water with all the charm of a tax audit. She coasted up to my dock with a smile slick enough to sell lemons as luxury cars. "I'm Brenda Carmichael from the executive estate across the way." Executive estate? Jesus. Then she hit me with it. Official HOA business. Out came a manila folder, flashed with the flourish of a game show prize reveal. According to her, the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association had voted in new aesthetic standards, and apparently my rustic cabin didn't measure up. I set my mug down hard enough to ring against the rail like a warning bell. What homeowners association? That plastic smile cracked, baring teeth. The one that protects our property values from declining influences. That aluminum boat has got to go, and frankly, the fishing gear lying around makes this place look like a bait shop exploded. My so-called declining influence was a 1995 Lund that had hauled in more fish than her floating living room ever would. The gear she mocked? My grandfather's hand-carved rod holders and a tackle box older than she was. Lady, this land has been in my family longer than you've been alive. There's no HOA covenant on my deed, and there never will be. The mask slipped completely then. Her voice went ice cold. "We'll see about that, won't we, soldier boy?" She cranked the throttle like a getaway driver, her wake slamming into my dock so hard it spilled my coffee. The stench of burning gas and overpriced perfume hung in the crisp pine air like a curse. As her mansion's windows caught the sunrise like a predator's eyes, my old military instincts stirred, the ones that kept me alive through 3 deployments. This wasn't just a neighbor squabble. This was war, and I knew I'd just been drafted. 3 days later, I found an envelope taped to my front door like a parking ticket straight out of hell. Inside was the most elaborate piece of fiction I'd laid eyes on since my ex-wife's divorce settlement. Demands had nothing on this. Across expensive letterhead in blood-red letters blared, Lake Serenity Homeowners Association Violation Notice. According to the document, I owed $500 for failing to maintain dock aesthetic standards and had 30 days to comply or risk more fines and possible property liens. It looked intimidating. Official seals, case numbers, legal-sounding jargon designed to scare the average homeowner into cutting a check. Problem was, it was worth less than the ink it was printed with. Most people wouldn't know that. Time for reconnaissance. The Cedar Falls courthouse basement reeked of old leather and dashed hopes, its fluorescent lights casting dust motes that drifted like the ghosts of bureaucrats long gone. My Army days taught me the best intel comes from the people who've been filing papers longer than you've been alive. That's how I ended up chatting with Dolores, the 70-something county clerk, whose arthritic hands trembled slightly as she slid my property file across the counter. "Another HOA victim, huh?" she whispered. "That Carmichael woman's been in here 6 times this month asking about enforcement procedures and lien authority. Between you and me, honey, she doesn't know her ass from her elbow about property law." Sure enough, my deed was crystal clear. No covenants, no restrictions, no HOA authority. But my logistics training had drilled one thing into me. Always check what the enemy's really doing while they're distracting you with theater. Turns out Brenda's Lake Serenity Homeowners Association was real, incorporated just 18 months earlier with exactly 12 members out of 47 properties. Legally, they had about as much authority over my land as my neighbor's cat. But while cross-referencing ownership records, my internal alarms started blaring. Several lakefront properties had recently transferred to Carmichael Holdings LLC. A quick online search confirmed my suspicion. Our self-appointed HOA queenpin was running an unlicensed vacation rental empire, turning family cabins into noisy weekend getaways for Twin Cities tourists. The same woman lecturing me about community standards was the one tearing them apart. I remembered one of my grandfather's old sayings: "Before you fight City Hall, make sure you know who actually runs the city." Smart man. He'd also drilled into me that most county records, property records, business licenses, covenant restrictions, most of it is public information, free to search if you know where to look. It's amazing what you dig up when you actually do your homework, instead of just waving threats around. With that intel in my pocket, I decided it was time for a little community reconnaissance, 21st century style. Facebook might be a graveyard for common sense, but it's also where you find out who's watching the neighborhood. My post was short. Anyone else getting violation notices from the Lake Serenity HOA? Asking for educational purposes. The response? Immediate and explosive. My phone lit up like a warehouse full of fireworks. 8 neighbors messaged me directly, each with their own personal Brenda nightmare. She'd been working the shoreline like a storm front, dropping threats on elderly widows over bird feeders and scolding young parents about mailbox paint. Janet, a retired librarian whose organizational skills could shame the CIA, had a 3-ring binder crammed with evidence. Tom at the marina shared photos of Brenda's bounced checks and unpaid fuel slips. Even Florence, 90 years old and still sharp as a blade, had noticed strange late-night traffic at Brenda's family rentals. That's when I launched a private group chat, Lake Serenity Truth Squad. If you're gonna fight madness, you might as well frame it like a comic book. Later that evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I picked up. Brenda's voice spilled through the line like syrup spiked with chemicals.
Marcus, sweetie, I saw your little Facebook post. You're making things unnecessarily difficult for yourself. Just asking questions, Brenda. Neighborly curiosity, I said. Her tone chilled, sharp as a blade across glass. Oh, honey, you don't want to take this road with me. I have connections you can't even imagine. I'll report you to the proper authorities for harassment and cyberbullying. The call dropped. I stared at my phone, wondering exactly what connections a shady vacation rental queen thought she had with county cops. As dusk fell over the lake, I sat on my dock, listening to waves tapping the old boards, air still tinged with pine and fish fry. The sunset cast gold across the shoreline, each Truth Squad house glowing like a watchtower in the gathering dark. Brenda had slipped up. She picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to gather intel before launching a counterattack. If she thought Facebook drama could scare me off, she hadn't studied veterans. We don't retreat. We adapt, improvise, and, when necessary, overanalyze everything.
3 in the morning. I was busy sketching out 17 different battle plans when Tuesday morning delivered a surprise visitor. At exactly 9 a.m., the crunch of tires on gravel announced Tom Hendricks from County Code Enforcement, who looked about as cheerful as a man heading into a root canal. Apparently, Brenda believed in punctuality when it came to filing bogus complaints. Mr. Marcus, sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on some reports about dock violations and an abandoned vehicle. The embarrassment in his eyes told me everything about the quality of her accusations. I handed him a cup of coffee that actually tasted like coffee, none of that battery acid government offices seem to prefer, and we strolled down to examine my supposedly criminal dock. Tom measured, double-checked, scribbled on his clipboard, then shook his head like a man realizing his morning had been wasted on nonsense. Between you and me, he muttered, lowering his voice even though nobody was around, this is the 23rd complaint I've gotten from the same address in 6 months. Lady's got the county office on speed dial. Then Tom dropped the real gem. Brenda had tried slipping him a $100 bill during their last encounter, calling it a consulting fee for finding creative interpretations of building codes. That wasn't neighborhood micromanagement. That was testing the waters for small-time corruption. My grandfather used to say you can judge a person by how they treat service workers and civil employees. Brenda's methods? Intimidate or buy them. That evening, the Truth Squad went undercover as observers at Brenda's emergency HOA meeting, which was about as democratic as a North Korean election. It took place in her mansion's great room, a cavern stuffed with so much beige and gold furniture it looked like a showroom had detonated. Only 6 people attended, mostly property managers from her rental operation, each looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Brenda, of course, had whipped up an elaborate PowerPoint titled Protecting Our Community Investment. It featured pie charts about property values and glossy photos of non-compliant homes, coincidentally, all owned by folks who had refused to join her HOA. Janet, bless her librarian soul, took notes with the precision of someone archiving war crimes. But the real intel surfaced when she noticed Brenda glancing nervously at a Rolex and sneaking anxious looks toward the kitchen. During a bathroom break, because nothing says professional meeting like a bathroom break in someone's living room, Janet shadowed her and overheard a heated phone call. "I told you the payments are coming," Brenda hissed. "These people are more stubborn than we expected, but I've got new strategies. Legal pressure, code enforcement, whatever it takes." The puzzle pieces snapped together like a mosaic of red flags. This had nothing to do with protecting community standards. Someone was leaning hard on Brenda financially, and she was scrambling to turn harassment into revenue. I'd seen this pattern in the Army. Under stress, people make desperate moves, and sooner or later they cross lines they swore they never would. The only question was, who had their hand on Brenda's financial leash? The answer came quicker than I expected. While
While digging into her lawyer, the same one who'd sent me that threatening cease and desist letter, I learned he specialized in foreclosure defense and debt collection. Not exactly the type you hire for neighborhood spats unless you're already drowning in lawsuits. That told me plenty. So I did the only sensible thing. I filed my own complaint against Brenda for harassment, submitting false reports, and abusing county resources for personal grudges. Two could play the bureaucracy game, and I'd had years of practice wrestling with military red tape. Then I pushed it further. Using the property management company's contact information from rental listings, I reached out to the actual owner of Brenda's mansion. Northwood's management was very interested to hear about their tenants' creative lease violations and her little side business. Not long after, Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez, who had been tracking the flood of complaints from our lake, pulled me aside after I filed my counterclaim. Off the record, he said, leaning against his cruiser as the evening light glittered off the water like diamonds, "We've been documenting everything. Nothing criminal yet, but she's towing a very fine line. We're watching." That night, sitting on my dock, I listened to the waves lapping the wood and the faint laughter of a real family barbecue drifting across the lake. It hit me. Brenda had made a critical mistake. She thought everyone would fold like frightened civilians. Instead, she had unknowingly united a community that had quietly kept to itself for decades. The smell of charcoal, pine, and honest conversation carried across the water, and for the first time in
months, Lake Serenity truly felt like home. Tomorrow might bring another fight, but tonight the good guys were ahead. If Brenda believed calling in code enforcement was her nuclear strike, she hadn't yet deployed the real weapons of bureaucratic mass destruction. That bombshell arrived at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, a day that started calm and spiraled faster than a greased pig at a county fair. I was savoring my sacred morning ritual, that first sip of coffee that convinces you the world isn't entirely insane, when I heard the crunch of police tires on gravel. Blue lights flashed across my cabin walls like some twisted version of the Northern Lights, and I could almost feel Brenda's smug satisfaction radiating from her deck across the lake. Two officers stepped out of the cruiser. They looked about as enthused as mall cops sent to shut down a senior citizen flash mob. The younger one had the earnest face of someone who still believed every 911 call mattered, while his partner, a grizzled sergeant with weary eyes, looked like he'd seen every variety of human stupidity and already knew this would be another waste of taxpayer money. "Mr. Marcus," the younger said, "we've received reports that you're trespassing on private property and making threats against a female resident." I waved them inside. "If you're going to be falsely accused at dawn, you might as well serve decent coffee." I kept things civilized. The senior officer, Sergeant Peterson, his name tag made that clear, accepted my offer of coffee like it was salvation. Probably because he knew government-issued brew usually tasted like regret mixed with budget cuts. "Sir, we have to respond to all calls," Peterson said, lowering himself into my grandfather's old kitchen chair, which groaned like a ship in rough seas. "But between you and me, this complaint doesn't pass the smell test." That's when I brought out my secret weapon, documentation. Security camera footage, property deeds, a full timeline of Brenda's harassment campaign. Even Tom, the code enforcement officer's written statement about her attempted bribery. I'd learned in the Army that paperwork wins wars, and this fight was about to turn very one-sided. Peterson watched the footage of my supposed threats. In reality, it showed me helping elderly Florence load her fishing gear into her car while Brenda peeked from behind her mansion windows like some cut-rate spy novel villain. The trespassing she accused me of happened on a public access road, one that had been public since before she was even born, despite the shiny private property signs she'd slapped up overnight like a wannabe land baron. "Ma'am," Peterson muttered at the screen, "either you're the world's most polite terrorist or somebody's been pulling our chain."
While the officers flipped through my evidence, my phone buzzed. Dave Morrison, private investigator, part-time tackle shop clerk, and a man who looked like he could arm wrestle a grizzly, had finished the background check I'd hired him for. His findings could have fueled an entire soap opera season. Turns out, Brenda Carmichael owed $47,000 in unpaid HOA fees from her last neighborhood in Minneapolis. The irony was thick enough to butter and serve at the county fair. She'd been sued, lost, and that explained her suspiciously deep knowledge of legal intimidation tactics. Worse, she owed money everywhere: contractors, credit card companies, even local service providers. Her pattern was always the same: threaten lawsuits, drag things out, and bully creditors until they gave up or settled for pennies. But the real kicker? Dave uncovered that her rental operation violated 3 zoning ordinances, none of which she'd bothered to get the required licenses for. The county had 0 record of her vacation rental business, which meant she'd been running it illegally the entire time she lectured everyone else about community standards. By then, our little truth squad had grown to 15 lake residents, each with their own Brenda horror story. Tom at the marina revealed she owed him $3,200 in dock fees and threatened a discrimination lawsuit when he asked for payment. The hardware store owner produced security footage of her buying supplies, then disputing the charges with her credit card company, claiming the materials were defective but never returning a single item. The pattern was clearer than lake water on a still morning. Brenda weaponized legal threats to dodge legitimate debts, betting most folks would rather eat the loss than spend years in court. Peterson closed my folder, shaking his head like a man who had just realized. Hunting unicorns. Mr. Marcus, Peterson said, lowering his voice, I strongly recommend you file charges for false police reports. This lady has been using us as her private muscle, and that ends today. As their cruiser rolled away, tires crunching over gravel that suddenly sounded like victory drums, I caught sight of Brenda's silhouette.
Retreating from her mansion window, the lake mist lifted with the clean scent of pine and new possibility. Tomorrow, my attorney had promised, would bring news that could change everything. The edge in his voice suggested Brenda's house of cards was about to collapse in ways she couldn't even imagine. The loons called across the water, their eerie cries mingling with the sounds of normal families starting their mornings, families not weighed down by lawsuits or bribery schemes. Arthur Payton had been my grandfather's lawyer since Carter sat in the White House, and at 78 he still dressed like a man ready to argue before the Supreme Court. His office smelled of leather and old cigars, the walls lined with so many law books they seemed ready to avalanche and bury unsuspecting clients beneath centuries of precedent. Marcus, you'd better sit for this, Arthur said, pushing up wire-rimmed glasses that looked like they'd survived the Constitutional Convention. He spread a stack of documents across his mahogany desk like a man revealing a royal flush. Deeds, trust agreements, incorporation papers, signatures and dates I'd never seen before. When your grandfather passed, you inherited more than the cabin, Arthur said carefully, the way lawyers speak before dropping bombshells. In 1987, he created the Northwoods Property Trust. You, Marcus, now own a 60% controlling interest in that trust. It holds 4 lakefront properties. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. 4 properties, including the $800,000 mansion currently occupied by none other than Brenda Carmichael. The realization hit me like a cold slap. I hadn't just been fighting a hostile neighbor. I had been battling my own tenant. For 3 years, Brenda had dutifully paid rent to a property management firm that funneled the money into an account I never knew existed. The same woman who hounded me over community standards. It was as if money kept sliding into my pocket every single month. Arthur produced a lease agreement thick enough to stop a bullet.
Your grandfather left nothing to chance. The lease spelled out rules on peaceful use of nearby properties, bans on unauthorized business activity, and strict expectations of community harmony. Miss Carmichael had broken about 14 separate terms. The irony was almost divine. Brenda had been tormenting her own landlord while falling behind on rent, running illegal businesses in violation of her contract, and continuously disturbing other tenants within the same trust. "How far behind is she?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. 2 months, with late charges stacking up. The property managers were preparing eviction papers, but they needed the trust's approval. That meant me. I stared at the documents, my thoughts racing back to 3 years of deposits I had assumed came from some mysterious inheritance fund. Suddenly, Brenda's desperate actions clicked into place. She wasn't just facing harassment claims and zoning violations. She was about to lose the very foundation of her rental scheme. "Arthur, she doesn't know I'm her landlord, does she?" His lined face spread into a smile fit for a courtroom victory. "Not unless she's far sharper than her recent actions suggest." The realization hit me like a sudden tactical breakthrough. Yes, I could evict Brenda immediately for her breaches, but that would feel like winning by technicality, not by fairness. My grandfather always taught me that true power is knowing when not to wield it. "What would you suggest?" Arthur leaned back, his chair groaning like the hull of an old ship in a storm. "Give her one last chance. Keep everything documented. Offer mediation. Show that you tried to handle this fairly. Judges respect landlords who attempt diplomacy before using force." He tapped the eviction notice already drafted. "But if she pushes again, 30 days to vacate. Clean, legal, and devastating to her fragile financial empire." I left Arthur's office with the dizzying feeling that I'd been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. The afternoon sunlight turned Main Street to gold, and for the first time in months, I felt like the universe had a sense of humor. Brenda Carmichael, HOA tyrant and vacation rental queen, had unknowingly been paying her greatest enemy to let her destroy his peace. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is realizing you've been holding all the cards from the start. You know that moment when you're building IKEA furniture and suddenly realize the instructions have been upside down for hours? That was exactly how I felt leaving Arthur's office, except instead of ending up with a crooked shelf, I'd somehow become the "It's legal to record on your own property in most states," Arthur pointed out, flipping through a law book heavy enough to stop small arms fire. "Always check local statutes first. Documented proof beats he said every time." We built what Arthur called the escalation protocol.
A step-by-step plan designed to give Brenda every chance to save face while also documenting her refusal to act responsibly. First, I'd approach her as a concerned neighbor and offer mediation through county community services. If she refused or escalated, we'd disclose the landlord relationship publicly at the next town council meeting. Janet studied Robert's Rules of Order like she was prepping for a Senate hearing, and Arthur drafted legal notice templates for every conceivable scenario. The man had contingency plans for his contingency plans, from zoning complaints to potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. Always give someone a face-saving way out, Arthur advised, arranging papers with the meticulousness of a medieval scribe illustrating a manuscript. Courts like parties who try reasonable resolutions, and juries despise bullies who refuse sensible offers. The Truth Squad morphed into a neighborhood watch operation that would make the NSA jealous. 15 Lake residents coordinated in our group chat, trading real-time updates about Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. Tom at the marina agreed to log any future incidents, and local businesses pledged to back our paper trail with their own harassment records. We even lined up media contacts in case this ballooned into public interest. The local editor was already sniffing around after whispers of bribery attempts and zoning violations.
The community protection effort felt like a feel-good movie, just with more affidavits and fewer musical numbers. Several older neighbors installed security cameras after Brenda's intimidation visits, and Truth Squad volunteers began accompanying vulnerable residents on errands to avoid isolated confrontations. Sitting in Arthur's office that evening, amid evidence folders and strategy memos, the scent of old law books mingling with Janet's cookies and the faint trail of Dave's cigar, I realized we'd accidentally created something admirable, a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, I'd give Brenda one final chance to pick dignity over destruction. After that, the nuclear option would be armed and ready. If Brenda thought my swelling community support was mere small-town gossip, she hadn't been paying attention to the tactical picture forming around her. What happened next showed how spectacularly stupid desperate people can be, especially when cornered like rabid raccoons in designer cardigans. The sabotage began subtly, which should have warned me she'd graduated from amateur hour harassment to outright criminality. She'd been stalking our Truth Squad on Facebook like a scorned teenage ex, building fake profiles to pry for intel and spin counter-narratives about my supposed instability. Then, one Tuesday night, my security cameras caught something that made my military-grade paranoia seem casual. At 2:17 a.m., a pickup truck matching her handyman's truck crept past my dock like a botched suburban stealth mission. The driver had a baseball cap tugged low, but under my new LED floodlights, the license plate shone clear as day. By Wednesday morning, I found a surprise that might have ruined me if I hadn't already learned to expect the worst from people who drowned themselves in perfume and legal threats. My fishing boat sat half-submerged at the dock, looking like a maritime crime scene. The drain plug hadn't been jostled loose or damaged, it had been deliberately removed. Result, $2,800 worth of water damage to the motor and electronics, plus tackle gear older than Brenda herself. The cocktail of lake water, oil, and gasoline carried the unmistakable scent of insurance claims and felony charges. Here's where Brenda's desperation showed just how little she understood modern evidence. My security cameras captured the whole thing in sharp, high-definition detail, complete with audio, of her handyman muttering about crazy lady jobs while working. I filed the police report with the care of someone who'd been cataloging harassment for months. Deputy Rodriguez arrived within the hour, watched the footage, and shook his head like a man watching tax dollars swirl down a drain. "This crossed a line," he said, inspecting the missing drain plug. "Property damage over $1,000 is felony territory. Your electronics alone seal it." While I was neck-deep in insurance adjusters and marine mechanics, Brenda was apparently unraveling across the lake. Truth Squad members reported her behavior escalating from harassment into full-on spectacle. She started cornering elderly neighbors like a door-to-door cult recruiter, demanding loyalty pledges in what she called the lake war. Florence, 90 years old and sharper than most, told her exactly where to shove those demands, with language salty enough to make a sailor blush and a Sunday school teacher take notes. Tom at the marina finally banned her from the fuel dock after she unloaded on a teenage worker, ranting about conspiracy pricing and bias.
It's against successful women. The kid was earning $8 an hour and probably couldn't even spell conspiracy, much less mastermind one against rental queens. The grocery store episode became legend within a single day. Brenda melted down at the checkout, accusing the cashier of overcharging her and demanding to speak directly to corporate HQ about systematic harassment of professional women. The manager, a saintly woman who'd seen it all, from coupon fraud to Christmas chaos, finally asked her to leave when Brenda began filming customers and shouting for witnesses to discrimination. But the real intelligence breakthrough came from Janet's research skills at the library. She dug up Brenda's residential history stretching back 8 years, and the pattern was identical everywhere she had lived. Neighbor disputes spiraled into harassment complaints, accusations of instability hurled at anyone who challenged her, and eventual departure under what clearly looked like legal pressure. Former landlords all described the same escalation cycle, most ending in eviction proceedings. One property manager in Minneapolis had even secured a restraining order after Brenda threatened to ruin a neighbor who complained about her illegal dog breeding business. Another complex had surveillance footage of her keying cars belonging to residents who'd reported her for noise violations. Meanwhile, my preparations continued with the discipline of a military operation closing in on D-Day. Arthur filed for a restraining order, citing the growing pattern of harassment and property damage. We worked with the insurance investigator on possible fraud charges, since Brenda's handyman had suddenly developed selective amnesia about his midnight marina trip. Pressure was mounting from all sides. Online reviews of Brenda's vacation rentals began flagging unstable management and neighborhood conflicts, and her booking rates sank faster than her credit rating. The property management company was receiving official complaints about her behavior breaking community standards. County zoning officials had launched a formal probe into her unlicensed business activities. And the local newspaper was now pressing hard with questions about corruption, intimidation, and harassment patterns. That evening, I sat on my newly repaired dock, listening to the waves slap gently against fresh bumpers and breathing air that smelled like pine needles mixed with victory. It hit me. Brenda had made her final mistake. She had turned her criminal stunts into hard evidence that could annihilate her in any courtroom. Desperate people usually reach one of two ends. They either accept defeat with some grace, or they double down on stupidity until they become infamous. Brenda, being Brenda, chose option 2 with the zeal of a kamikaze pilot steering straight for an aircraft carrier. What happened next might have been funny if it hadn't been so pathetic and criminal. County Commissioner Bill Hayes had served Cedar Falls for 12 years without a single ethics complaint, which meant Brenda's approach landed about as well as a tornado at a church picnic. According to Bill's later testimony, she strutted into his office one Tuesday morning, designer purse swinging and radiating the kind of entitlement that comes from breathing your own fumes. "Commissioner Hayes, I have a proposition that could benefit both of us," she declared, sliding an envelope across his desk like she was trading in state secrets rather than attempting to bribe a small-town politician who probably earned less in a year than she spent on shoes. Inside, $5,000 in cash, offered as consulting services regarding the so-called environmental hazard posed by my property. She even used air quotes while suggesting that my grandfather's cabin should be condemned as a danger to the lake's water quality. Bill Hayes had been in politics long enough to smell corruption the moment it strolled into his office dressed in white capris and desperation perfume. He immediately reported the bribery attempt to the district attorney, sparking an investigation that made Watergate look like a squabble over a parking ticket. But Brenda wasn't done peddling her criminal services like some door-to-door corruption sales rep. She tried the same routine with the county zoning inspector and even offered a sheriff's deputy what she called a community safety donation in exchange for ignoring her so-called minor licensing oversights. The zoning inspector, Carl, a rigid, by-the-book man who treated building codes like sacred scripture, actually wore a wire during their second meeting. The audio was so sharp you could hear her bracelets clinking as she counted out bills while insisting that Marcus, the dangerous veteran, needed to be relocated for community safety. Deputy Rodriguez logged her attempt in an official report that read like a textbook example of how not to sway public officials. Somehow, Brenda had escalated a neighborhood squabble into a federal-level case faster than you could say conspiracy to commit corruption. When Arthur called with the DA's update, his voice carried that special tone lawyers get when they're trying hard not to sound pleased about being vindicated. "Marcus, she's staring down potential prison time. Bribing public officials is a felony with teeth." I felt conflicted in ways my military training hadn't prepared me for. I wanted justice, not a front-row seat to someone's life imploding. But Brenda had crossed so many lines that what started as a property dispute had transformed into criminal warfare. And there was no way to shove that toothpaste back into the tube. The local newspaper editor, who had been tailing the story with the persistence of a bloodhound on a bacon trail, reached out for an interview.
"This has gone well past neighborhood drama," she explained. "Public corruption allegations are real news, and the community has a right to know." The media spotlight set the stage for Brenda's ultimate meltdown at the public boat launch in front of 27 witnesses who thought they were just there to fish, not watch live reality television. "This is all a conspiracy," Brenda shrieked, jabbing a finger at me with enough venom to drop small wildlife. "He's been stalking me for months. I demand he cover my legal fees and moving expenses." The claim was so absurd that a few witnesses laughed out loud. Florence, patiently loading fishing gear with the wisdom of someone who'd outlasted 3 husbands and 2 presidents, finally had enough. "Honey, I've lived on this lake for 60 years, she said, with the authority of earned seniority. "And you're the problem. That boy hasn't done a thing but fish and mind his own business, while you've been running around throwing lawsuits like some kind of legal terrorist." The crowd nodded in unison, a Greek chorus of common sense. Dozens of people pulled out their phones, eager to capture what was destined to become social media gold. Brenda, realizing she'd burned every bridge in town, stormed off, vowing to hire real lawyers with money everyone knew she didn't have. That evening, Arthur advised me to make our landlord connection public at the next town council meeting. "It's time to end this before she does even more damage to herself or anyone else," he said, arranging files with the precision of a man staging a courtroom ambush. "Her own criminal behavior has forced your hand." Word spread through Cedar Falls faster than gossip at a church potluck. The county attorney announced he'd attend to observe potential witness testimony, while the regional newspaper dispatched a reporter after hearing rumors of small-town corruption scandals. That night, sitting on my dock, I listened to the loons calling across water shimmering with stars, and realized Brenda had unwittingly handed me something priceless, the moral high ground in a community that refused to be bullied. Tomorrow, the truth would finally stand on its own, whether in a courtroom or a high school gymnasium. If you've never witnessed 300 small-town residents jammed into a gym for what was supposed to be a routine council meeting, you've missed democracy at its most theatrical. The energy was part championship basketball game, part public execution, though instead of hot dogs and nachos, the concession stand offered homemade popcorn. Local shops closed early so their owners could attend what people were already calling the Great Lake Showdown. The regional TV news crew planted cameras like they were covering a presidential debate, while county officials lined the back row with the grim satisfaction of people ready to see justice delivered with a side of accountability. Brenda entered fashionably late, trailed by a slick Twin Cities lawyer in a $1,000 suit who probably billed more per hour than most folks earned in a week. She wore a sharp white power suit that screamed, "I matter," though her jittery body language betrayed a woman who knew the walls were closing in faster than her unpaid credit card balances. I stepped up to the podium calmer than I had been in months, carrying a manila folder thick with evidence, enough to sink a battleship. The gym fell silent, save for the buzzing fluorescent lights and the faint growl of someone's stomach. Democracy, it turns out, makes people hungry. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my eyes sweeping across the faces I had grown to know as neighbors over the last few months. 3 months ago, I thought this was nothing more than a petty neighbor dispute. Tonight, I intended to show what it truly was. Arthur had crafted a presentation that could make any corporate executive jealous. Property ownership records projected onto the gym's screen in bold letters large enough to read from outside the building. The audience gasped together, the sound like 300 people realizing a magic trick was being undone before their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have been Brenda Carmichael's landlord for the past 3 years without realizing it." The room erupted like a stadium after a winning goal. Applause, laughter, and shouts of "I knew it" echoed through the gym, while Brenda's expression shifted colors faster than a mood ring tossed into an oven. Arthur's timeline of lease violations rolled out like a landlord's nightmare greatest hits.
Footage of the boat sabotage drew angry boos, and the audio of her bribery attempts made the county attorney sit upright, scribbling notes that looked suspiciously like legal charges in progress. Brenda's lawyer scrambled to contain the damage with all the futility of trying to seal a dam with chewing gum. My client was unaware of the ownership details and acted in good faith to uphold community standards, he insisted. The laughter from the audience was so loud it could have shaken windows in neighboring towns. Florence, seated proudly in the front row, cut through the noise with her sharp voice. "Good faith, my ass," she declared, loud enough to make the pastor cover his ears, while the newspaper reporter's pen nearly tore through the page. Financial records flashed on the screen. Unpaid bills, fake business accounts, and fraudulent transactions, like a criminal case study disguised as a spreadsheet. Local business owners shared their own stories of Brenda's manipulative payment tactics, while Tom from the marina raised copies of bounced checks as if presenting evidence to a jury. That's when I spoke the line I had practiced for days. "Miss Carmichael, I offered you respect as a neighbor and civil discussion as a community member. Instead, you chose intimidation, harassment, and criminal actions." I held up the eviction notice, sharp, legal, and impossible to ignore. "As your landlord, I am giving you 30 days to vacate for multiple lease violations. This could have been handled privately and respectfully." The crowd rose in a thunderous standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Florence led the applause like a conductor guiding an orchestra, while several Truth Squad members wiped away tears of relief, of victory, or both. Then Brenda rose, all drama and flair, as though she had been rehearsing courtroom speeches in her mirror for weeks. "This is all lies and conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at me with venom strong enough to poison a pond. "He's bought off the police and the media. This is harassment and discrimination." Sheriff's Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward, calm but firm. "We've reviewed evidence and received official complaints," he said. "This will be handled through proper legal channels. No one is above the law, and false claims won't change the facts." His words cut through the tension, and slowly the gym quieted, leaving behind the heavy silence of a community that had finally seen the truth laid bare. Rodriguez stepped closer as Brenda's shouting rose well past acceptable indoor levels. Her attorney held her back from storming the podium, likely sparing her fresh charges for disorderly conduct, or worse, attempted assault. Afterward, the TV reporter approached me with questions that felt more like gentle lobs from a kindly grandmother than hard-hitting journalism. "What advice would you give others facing HOA abuse?" she asked. "Document everything. Know your rights. And never forget, bullies only win when good people stay silent." The next morning's headline blared, "Lake Dispute Exposes Bribery Scheme." Overnight, our once small neighborhood drama had turned into a wider cautionary tale about power, corruption, and the importance of reading your property deeds. As the crowd left that night, buzzing like teenagers after a sold-out concert, I realized we'd built something unexpected. A community unwilling to be cowed, no matter how loudly someone screamed about their supposed importance. That check clears the bank. Within 2 weeks, she stuffed her designer bags and bruised ego into a U-Haul bound for Florida. She left behind a flimsy forwarding address and property damage resembling a fraternity house after spring break. Her criminal case wrapped up with small-town efficiency. Brenda accepted a plea deal, probation, and 200 hours of community service. An ironic punishment for someone who had spent months tormenting her own neighbors. Her pricey lawyer likely billed more for negotiating that deal than most people earned in a year. But at least justice arrived with a side of financial sting. I never set out to become Cedar Falls' reluctant community organizer, but apparently standing up for fishing rights qualifies you for leadership you never asked for. From the ashes of the Truth Squad, the Lake Serenity Advisory Committee was born, setting fair standards without the authoritarian streak that poisons so many HOAs.
We teamed up with county environmental officials on lake conservation projects, built a neighborhood watch that targeted actual
crime instead of bird feeders, and launched mediation services for minor disputes, no lawyers or courts required. The true legacy came from an idea sparked by 3 years of unexpected rental income. We created the Lake Serenity Community Scholarship Fund, designed to reward local kids who embodied service rather than selfishness. Each spring, scholarships go to students pursuing careers in environmental science, law, or public service. Our annual fundraiser has since become Cedar Falls' signature social event, complete with a heavenly fish fry, lively bluegrass music, and a storytelling contest where neighbors trade Remember Brenda tales with the fondness usually reserved for surviving natural disasters. Florence stole last year's show with her dramatic reenactment of telling Brenda exactly where she could shove her loyalty demands. Her performance, complete with hand gestures bold enough to make firefighters blush, inspired the Methodist minister's next sermon on righteous anger and divine justice. Healing came like a Minnesota spring, slow at first, then all at once, reviving corners of life I'd forgotten could ever bloom. The peace I had sought brought unexpected gifts, real friendships born from the fires of resistance, and neighbors who proved they would stand shoulder to shoulder when bullies tried to divide us. Around Christmas, Janet and I began dating, bonding over our shared love of documentation and her uncanny knack for organizing community uprisings. Librarians, it turns out, make exceptional partners, especially when they're not dismantling vacation rental schemes with nothing more than research skills and persistence. I rediscovered my grandfather's woodworking shop, crafting picnic tables for the public lake access and teaching kids how to shape wood into something useful instead of wasting energy on petty lawsuits. Few things rival the satisfaction of creating beauty from raw materials, especially after months battling people who produced nothing but chaos out of sheer entitlement. Our conservation efforts grew into a statewide model for grassroots environmental care. Families gathered for weekend cleanup days, students tested water quality, and children learned that protecting nature demands cooperation, not conflict. State agencies now highlight Lake Serenity as proof of what communities can achieve when they pull together. From all this, I distilled 3 battle-tested lessons every homeowner should know. First, always research deed restrictions before buying. Most HOA rules are unenforceable fantasies crafted by people armed with Google law degrees. Second, public record searches are free. They expose liens, judgments, and licenses that intimidation can't hide. Knowledge beats threats every time. Third, security cameras and good documentation stop harassment more effectively than any attorney. Invest in solid equipment and know your local recording laws. Our neighborhood saga, amplified by media coverage, evolved into inspiration for communities across the country resisting HOA tyranny. I've spoken on property rights podcasts, testified at municipal meetings, and somehow stumbled into the role of reluctant champion for ordinary citizens refusing to be crushed by bureaucratic bullying. Just last week, Janet mentioned her sister's fight with predatory towing companies targeting drivers in Duluth. Same intimidation playbook, she said, flashing paperwork that lit up my well-tuned bully radar. Interesting, I replied, savoring coffee that tasted like victory and fresh possibility. This morning, as the sunrise painted Lake Serenity in gold and loons called across calm water, I heard my grandfather's wisdom as clearly as if he stood beside me. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. The scent of pine needles blended with fresh coffee and the quiet promise of another day in a community that had learned to fight back against those who mistake authority for permission to abuse. If you've lived through your own HOA nightmare, share it in the comments. We can help others fight and win. And if you enjoyed seeing justice triumph over arrogance with a side of poetic karma, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for HOA Stories, where everyday people refuse to let neighborhood tyrants steal their peace. Thanks for joining us on HOA Stories, where the Karens of the HOA finally meet their match. If this tale made you cheer, cringe, or both, drop a comment, like the video, and get ready for the next unbelievable HOA showdown.